At 3:19 in the morning Tehran time on March 10, 2026, a 34-year-old emergency medicine physician named Dr. Layla Ahmadi was finishing the final hour of her overnight shift at Imam Khomeini Hospital in western Tehran when the building shook with a force that she later described to a colleague through a Starlink terminal as feeling like the Earth had decided to stand up. The seismic monitoring station at the University of Tehran's Geophysics Department, which operates continuously and whose data feeds directly into international seismological networks that any researcher with an internet connection can access in real time, registered a 2 magnitude event at 3:19 and 47 seconds with an epicenter 3 kilometers southeast of the Fordo fuel enrichment plant near Qom, 140 kilometers south of Tehran. 14 seconds later, a second event registered at 9 magnitude at almost the same coordinates, then a third at 1 magnitude, 22 seconds after the second. The seismologists at the University of Tehran monitoring station knew immediately that what their instruments were recording was not an earthquake. Natural seismic events do not arrive in sequential, discrete pulses, 14 and 22 seconds, apart from the same geographic point. What their instruments recorded at 3:19 in the morning was the sequential detonation of GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators as they burrowed through 80 meters of granite into the enrichment halls of Fordo and detonated in the chamber whose existence the Iranian government had spent 15 years insisting made nuclear destruction from the air impossible. The seismologists knew. The doctors in Tehran hospitals felt the building move and knew. The Iranian citizens with Starlink terminals who were accessing international seismological databases in real time knew within 4 minutes of the first detonation. The Iranian government knew. The one entity that did not officially know for the next 3 hours and 42 minutes was the Iranian public, because the regime was spending those 3 hours and 42 minutes deciding what version of the truth it could tell a population that had just felt the ground move and that was already telling the truth to each other through 4,000 satellite terminals that the regime could not shut down. The 3 hours and 42 minutes between the first Fordo detonation at 3:19 in the morning and the Iranian state television broadcast at 7:01 in the morning that officially acknowledged American strikes is the most revealing interval in the story of what really happened in Tehran when the first missiles hit, because what filled those 3 hours and 42 minutes was not the chaos of a government caught unprepared. It was the controlled chaos of a government implementing a pre-planned information management protocol that had been designed for exactly this scenario, and that was failing in real time against an information environment it had not anticipated. The protocol, which senior officials at the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting Authority had prepared in coordination with the IRGC's Psychological Operations Directorate, was built around 3 sequential phases. The first phase was silence. Maintain normal programming, do not acknowledge the strikes, allow the initial shock to pass without amplifying it through official confirmation that would create the permission structure for public panic. The second phase was reframing. Once silence became untenable, release a statement that acknowledged military activity while framing it within a narrative of American aggression against the Iranian people that mobilized nationalist sentiment rather than fear. The third phase was defiance. Present the IRGC's retaliatory strikes against American bases as evidence that Iran had responded immediately and effectively, transforming the story of Fordo's destruction into a story of Iranian military capability and national resolve. The protocol was professionally designed by people who had spent careers managing Iranian public opinion through crises. It failed because the information environment in Tehran on the morning of March 10, 2026, was fundamentally different from the information environment that any previous Iranian information management protocol had been designed to operate in. The Starlink network that had been distributed across Iran over the preceding 8 weeks was the specific technical factor that caused the protocol to fail, and its failure unfolded in a sequence that the American information operations planners who designed the Starlink distribution strategy had anticipated with a precision that reflects the sophistication of the planning investment. At 3:24 in the morning, Tehran time, 5 minutes after the first Fordo detonation, a Starlink-connected civil engineer in the city of Qom named Reza Tehrani posted a 47-second video to an encrypted messaging channel that he shared with 23 members of a discussion group focused on Iranian environmental issues. The video showed the sky southeast of Qom, lit by a series of orange flashes that illuminated the mountain where Fordo is located from within, the specific quality of light produced by underground detonations, venting energy through geological fractures rather than through the surface entry points of the penetrating munitions. Tehrani had no way of knowing what he was filming with certainty. He wrote a single sentence beneath the video: "Something is happening at the mountain." Within 11 minutes, that 47-second video had been shared to diaspora media channels in Los Angeles, London, and Toronto by recipients who recognized the mountain's silhouette and understood the significance of the light. Within 23 minutes, the video was being broadcast on Persian-language satellite television channels that reach approximately 8 million viewers inside Iran through satellite dishes that the regime has been trying to suppress for 25 years, and that 8 million households continue to operate, because the government's suppression efforts have never been fully enforced. The 47-second video from a civil engineer in Qom documenting something at the mountain reached 8 million Iranian viewers before Iranian state television had decided what to say about what was happening. The protocol's first phase, silence, had lasted 23 minutes before it was operationally irrelevant. What the Starlink network documented in the 2 hours between the first Fordo detonation and the first light of dawn in Tehran was not the story that either the American military's information operations team or the Iranian regime's information management protocol had anticipated as the primary narrative. Both sides had prepared for a story about military strikes on nuclear facilities, a story of strategic assets destroyed or defended, of national security objectives achieved or repelled. What the Starlink cameras captured instead was a human story of a city experiencing an existential shock with no official guidance, no warning, and no explanation, and responding with a complexity that neither side's narrative framework was designed to contain. In the wealthy northern neighborhoods of Tehran, where educated professional families have the highest concentration of Starlink terminals and the highest capacity for real-time information consumption and production, the response was organized and almost immediate. Within 30 minutes of the first detonations, neighborhood WhatsApp groups that function as Tehran's informal civil society infrastructure were providing real-time information about what was and was not being hit, where emergency services were responding, which roads were passable, and which information sources were providing accurate reporting, as opposed to speculation. The organizational capacity of Tehran's middle and upper middle class in a crisis without official guidance is the thing that neither the American information operations planners nor the Iranian regime's protocol designers had fully modeled, because it is the product of decades of living in a society where official information is systematically unreliable and where horizontal community networks have developed as the functional alternative to vertical state communication. In the southern working-class neighborhoods of Tehran, where Starlink terminal penetration is lower and where state television and government-affiliated mosque networks are more dominant information sources, the response to the first hour of silence was different and more frightening. Residents who felt the building shake at 3:19 in the morning and who had no Starlink connection and no VPN access, and who turned on their televisions to find a documentary about agricultural achievements, received no information that explained what they had felt. The mosques in southern Tehran began broadcasting through their loudspeakers at approximately 4:15 in the morning, not with official government guidance, because no official government guidance had been provided to the mosque networks, but with Quran recitations that are the traditional Islamic response to perceived danger, and that carry, in the context of Iranian cultural knowledge, a specific meaning. Something serious has happened, and we are asking God's protection. The Quran recitations from southern Tehran's mosque loudspeakers at 4:15 in the morning, heard by millions of residents who were already awake from the ground movement and who received no official explanation for why the mosques were broadcasting into the pre-dawn darkness, produced the panic that the regime's silence phase was designed to prevent. By 4:30 in the morning, traffic on Tehran's major roads, which should have been minimal at that hour, was documented by Starlink-connected residents as significantly elevated, with vehicles heading north toward the Alborz Mountains, in a pattern consistent with people leaving what they perceived as a target zone without any official direction to do so. The regime's silence had not prevented panic. It had produced panic without structure, panic without direction, panic filling the information vacuum with the worst versions of what people's imaginations produced in the absence of any official account of what was happening. The Iranian government's internal communications in the 3 hours and 42 minutes between the first strikes and the official television broadcast were captured in part by the NSA's Signals Intelligence Collection, which had been tasked against Iranian government communications at maximum priority throughout the crisis, and which continued collecting through the strike period and its immediate aftermath. The contents of that collection are classified. But officials familiar with its general character who spoke on background described an internal government communications environment that reflected not the controlled implementation of a prepared crisis management protocol, but the organizational breakdown that occurs when a bureaucratic hierarchy loses confidence in its own procedures under conditions of extreme stress. The Communications Ministry, which was responsible for implementing the National Information Network's internet suppression protocols in the event of a major crisis, attempted to activate the full internet shutdown protocol at 3:47 in the morning, 28 minutes after the first strikes. The activation failed to achieve full suppression because the mobile network infrastructure that provides internet access to smartphone users was experiencing overload from the surge in data traffic generated by millions of Iranians simultaneously attempting to access information through every available channel. The network overload meant the suppression protocols, which work by redirecting traffic at network switching points, could not redirect traffic that was overwhelming the switching infrastructure faster than the redirection systems could process it. The Starlink terminals were unaffected by the overload and the suppression attempt both, continuing to provide direct satellite connectivity to their users throughout the suppression attempt. The Communications Ministry's failure to achieve internet suppression in the first hour was itself communicated through the government's internal systems in language that official familiar with the collection described as reflecting genuine alarm among senior officials who had assumed the suppression capability would be fully functional when needed. The IRGC's public affairs operation, which is separate from and generally more capable than the civilian government's information management infrastructure, activated its own crisis communication protocol at approximately 4 hours in the morning. Tehran time, with a statement on its official Telegram channel that was the first official Iranian government communication about the strikes. The statement said in Farsi that the IRGC was fully prepared, and that the enemies of the Islamic Republic would receive a response proportionate to their aggression. The statement mentioned no specific events, no specific locations, and provided no information about what had occurred. Its function was not to inform, but to demonstrate that the IRGC was present and operational, countering the narrative vacuum that the Communications Ministry's failed suppression attempt had left with a signal of institutional capability. The statement was immediately shared by diaspora media organizations as evidence that Iran was acknowledging the attacks without officially acknowledging them, a reading that was largely correct. It produced 340,000 views on the IRGC's Telegram channel within 40 minutes, and generated a cascade of commentary from Iranian journalists and analysts outside Iran that provided the Iranian public with their first substantive real-time analysis of what the IRGC statement's vague language meant in the context of the seismological data, the comm video, and the satellite imagery that commercial providers had already begun publishing, showing thermal signatures at the Fordo mountain coordinates. The commercial satellite imagery that changed the information environment irrevocably arrived at 5:47 in the morning Tehran time, when Planet Labs, the American commercial satellite operator whose constellation of small imaging satellites provides near-continuous coverage of high-interest locations, published automatically to its public data feed a thermal infrared image of the Fordo mountain that showed heat signatures consistent with large underground detonations venting through geological fractures across an area approximately 400 meters in diameter, centered on the facility's known location. Planet Labs does not have an editorial policy about publishing imagery of active military strikes. Its automated systems publish data according to pre-programmed schedules, and the Fordo coordinates were on a high-frequency imaging schedule that the system executed without human review. The thermal image was indexed by the international media monitoring services that track commercial satellite feeds within 4 minutes of publication, and was being broadcast on Persian language satellite television within 11 minutes of its appearance in the Planet Labs data stream. The Iranian public, which had been living in an official information vacuum for 2 hours and 28 minutes, received visual confirmation of Fordo's destruction through a private American commercial satellite company's automated data publication system before Iranian state television had formulated its official statement. The Information Management Protocol's second phase, reframing, which required controlling the first official acknowledgement of the strikes to set the narrative frame, had been preempted by a commercial satellite company's automated imaging schedule. The regime was going to have to respond to the Planet Labs thermal image rather than setting its own terms for acknowledging the attack. The Iranian state television broadcast that finally aired at 7:01 in the morning, Tehran time, was the product of 3 hours and 42 minutes of internal deliberation that the NSA collection and the visible outputs of the regime's various communication channels allow partial reconstruction of. The broadcast was delivered by a senior state television anchor in full formal attire, indicating that the decision to broadcast had been made with enough lead time for production preparation, rather than being an emergency improvisation. The anchor's opening statement described what he called a criminal American assault against Iranian sovereign territory and the peaceful nuclear facilities of the Iranian people. The word peaceful applied to Fordo, which the Iranian government had built covertly beneath a mountain specifically to make it invulnerable to military attack, and which housed centrifuge cascades enriching uranium toward weapons-grade purity, was a framing choice that the Iranian government's most experienced communications professionals had selected from the options available to them. It was the best available framing choice in a situation where the framing choices were all bad. The broadcast then cut to footage that had clearly been prepared in advance, showing Iranian military personnel at what appeared to be operational missile battery positions, with IRGC commanders making statements about Iran's readiness and capability that were recorded before the broadcast, rather than live. The prepared footage was the second phase of the protocol, demonstrating IRGC operational capability as a counter-narrative to the story of Fordo's destruction. The third element of the broadcast, which covered the Iranian strikes on American bases in Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, and the UAE, was delivered with a specificity and confidence that contrasted sharply with the vague language about the American attack, because the IRGC's retaliatory strikes were the part of the story the regime wanted to tell loudly and in detail while minimizing the story of what had been done to Fordo. What the broadcast did not show, and what the 4,000 Starlink terminals across Iran were simultaneously documenting and transmitting, was the reality of Tehran in the 3 hours and 42 minutes before the broadcast. A pediatric nurse at Malad Hospital who was monitoring a Starlink terminal during her shift had posted a series of photographs showing the hospital's emergency department filling with people experiencing anxiety and respiratory distress, civilians who had inhaled smoke from secondary fires near military installations in the southern parts of the city that were not part of the American strike targets, but whose proximity to IRGC logistics facilities meant they were exposed to the secondary effects of Tomahawk impacts on those facilities. An architect in the Niavran neighborhood of northern Tehran had used his Starlink connection to conduct a 40-minute video call with his daughter in Toronto at 4:30 in the morning. A call that the daughter recorded and provided to a Persian-language news organization, and that showed a man sitting in his darkened apartment describing, calmly and in detail, what he was observing in his neighborhood. The sounds of distant explosions, the activated air defense systems attempting engagements in the sky visible from his window, the mosque loudspeakers broadcasting, the traffic on the road below his building heading north, and his own assessment of the situation, delivered with the specific calm of a person who had been expecting this moment for 6 weeks, and who was experiencing the surreal quality of anticipated catastrophe arriving exactly as anticipated. His assessment, they hit what they said they would hit, and not what they said they would not hit. That is how I know the state television will tell us it was an attack on the Iranian people. It was not. It was an attack on the weapons we were building beneath the mountain. The truth that America's media was not showing its audience on the morning of March 10th is not the truth of the strikes themselves, which were covered with the technical detail and operational specificity that American military journalism provides efficiently. The truth it was not showing was the truth of what 80 million people experienced in the 3 hours and 42 minutes between the first ground movement and the official broadcast. The truth of an information environment where a civil engineer's 47-second video reached 8 million people in 23 minutes, where a commercial satellite company's automated imaging system preempted a government's crisis management protocol, where a pediatric nurse's photographs from a hospital emergency department told a more immediate story than any official statement, where an architect's phone call to his daughter in Toronto produced a witness account whose clarity and specificity no embedded journalist could match, and where the regime's information management protocol failed, not because it was poorly designed, but because the information environment it was designed to operate in had been irreversibly changed by 4,000 satellite terminals that arrived in Iran through border crossings labeled as agricultural equipment and industrial spare parts over the preceding 8 weeks. The truth America's media was not showing was the truth of Iran from the inside on the morning that changed it, told in real time by the people living it, transmitted through technology that made the regime's decades of information control infrastructure obsolete in the moment it mattered most. That truth is not a story about missiles and targets and casualty counts. It is a story about what happens when a population that has been controlled through information deprivation suddenly has access to the same information environment as everyone else at the moment when the news is happening to them personally. It is a story about the 47-second video from COM and the architect's phone call to Toronto and the pediatric nurse's photographs from the emergency department and the 4,000 terminals that made all of it possible. It is the truth that the strikes produced that no satellite imagery and no Pentagon briefing and no State Department statement could provide. It is the truth from inside the mountain's shadow.